If you find yourself alone on a deserted island, make sure to check out the place I'm talking about today. That's because there are lots of terrifying things waiting for you, sir. Especially if you've been watching the show for some time. You've probably heard of the skulls that can talk. And now, believe it or not, you've got the chance to see one for yourself. At least that is what people say who have managed to stumble upon the island and tell stories of these events. But whether it's true or not, well, judge for yourself. Welcome to the channel. Chapter 1, Island of Fear. About a decade ago, a guy named Harry found himself washed up on a deserted island after a brutal storm knocked his yacht off course. He spent several days searching for help, building fires and sheltering from the elements. But no one came for him and there was no one else on the island. It felt like he was completely alone. Then he started hearing strange noises. It sounded like moans, whispers and murmurs. At first, he thought it was probably just his imagination playing tricks on him. But then he began to notice small details. For instance, one morning he woke up to find scratches on his arm. He checked himself over, but he couldn't find any animals that could have left them, sir. There were no more cats, dogs, ants, mosquitoes or snakes. The island seemed to be uninhabited. Nevertheless, the wounds continued to appear. Sometimes he found scratches, sometimes bites, and once he even saw strange puncture marks. Still, the man couldn't figure out what was happening to him. After a while, he met an elderly local named Thomas who explained that the island belonged to his grandfather, who bought it more than 50 years ago. Back then, the locals considered it cursed because shipwrecks often happened near it and nobody ever survived. But the rich man ignored their fears and built himself a house, sir. According to Thomas, many strange things happened, sir. Animals went crazy, plants withered, even the weather changed suddenly and unexpectedly. So when the old man died, his family sold the island. Since then, there have been frequent reports of mysterious incidents, sir. It's said that people who set foot on the island become insane. So Thomas asked Harry to leave immediately. However, the man refused. He was convinced that he could spend the rest of his life since there were no more people on the island and he was ready to live alone. But he underestimated the power of the curse. Chapter 2, Skull in the Cave. The first few months passed without incident. Harry hunted fish and swam in the sea. He explored the entire island, climbed trees and foraged for fruit. But then the problems began again. For example, he started seeing footprints in the sand, but he always found them washed away by the tide the next morning. At times, he found objects that hadn't been there the day before, like torn pieces of cloth or rusty nails. One day, the yacht washed ashore and he could finally repair it and send an SOS signal. But then the bad weather returned, the wind picked up, and there was a storm almost every day. Andy then had noticed bones on the shore. At first, it was just one or two, but then there were dozens of them. He followed the trail to a cave and he found hundreds of skeletons. He retreated a few steps and suddenly one of the skulls rolled closer to him. It was a woman's skull and she had no more lower jaw. The wind must have blown it off. Then Harry noticed a hole in the wall of the cave. It was too high for him to reach, but somehow he managed to pull himself up and pushed aside a large stone. Inside he found more skulls, including that of a child. The sight was so horrible that Harry passed out. When he woke up, he slipped out of the cave unnoticed. But it was too late. The island had claimed him. Chapter 3, Attack in the Forest. Over the years, Harry has repeatedly attempted to leave the island, but he always returns, sir. He hears voices whispering his name and beckoning him to return. Once he found a knife sticking out of a log, probably a recent one, as if someone had been sitting nearby sharpening it. But when he approached, there was no more one, sir. Another time, he saw a human leg sticking out from under the leaves. He quickly backed away and hid. But later, realizing that it was just a log, he returned to look for it. Again, there was no more trace of the leg. Harry's mind was deteriorating day by day. He began to think that the island was hunting him, that the plants wanted to tear him apart, that the animals wanted to devour him. To protect himself, he built a hut out of branches and stones. He lived there for months, subsisting only on berries, fruit and rainwater. But even that didn't save him. One night he was awakened by strange sounds. At first he thought it was the wind, but then he heard heavy footsteps nearby. The sounds of branches breaking, animal growls and screams echoed through the forest. But when Harry peeked outside, he didn't see anyone. Chapter 4. Escape Attempt. He began preparing to leave the island. Gathering his things, he moved to the beach, where he slept in his boat. For several weeks, the wizard was fine, so he repaired the yacht, and on a clear night, he decided to try leaving. But as soon as he sailed into the open sea, the wind abruptly shifted, increasing in speed. Soon the sea became rough. Waves crashed against the boat and threatened to capsize it. Harry struggled with the situation, but his yacht began to fall apart. The mast snapped, the sails ripped. He tried to call for help, but the wind snatched away his voice. Harry was left in the middle of the ocean without a single living soul around him. He waited for the rescue, but no more one came. The waves tossed him about until he lost consciousness. When he finally came to, he found himself back on the island, and his boat was once again on the shore. People say that Harry isn't quite right in the head anymore. He wanders around the beaches, muttering something to himself and occasionally taking out a knife to peel pieces of bark off logs. If you meet him, beware. He doesn't remember who he is and he mistakes strangers for his pursuers. He attacks anyone who comes too close, screaming that they want to drag him under the waves. Sometimes he runs into the water, believing that he sees his enemies. He keeps asking them to help him, to save him from the island. But those who dare to swim in those waters never return. Apparently, the island drags everyone down who even thinks about leaving. Chapter 5. The Legend of the Island. Legends say that the island was formed as a result of a battle between good and evil. The gods fought fiercely, unleashing all their wrath and magic. But when the fight was over, they vanished, leaving behind only their weapons and armor. Over the years, this stuff turned into rocks and soil, creating an island. And the gods' weapons, imbued with magical powers, remain there forever. Whoever finds them will possess incredible strength, but it also means that they'll have to fight with those who want to claim the gods' artifacts for themselves. Therefore, you shouldn't go to this island unless you want to be dragged into the fight. Besides, the weapon won't bring happiness, only more battles. So be careful. If you decide to find the island, you should know that you're walking into a trap laid by the gods themselves. If you succeed in navigating the shifting landscapes and avoiding deadly creatures, you might just find a treasure beyond your wildest dreams. But if you fail, you'll never get out alive. By the way, which island would you like to visit if given the chance? Feel free to share your thoughts. And that's all for today. See you later.